I never thought I'd fall in love again after my wife's betrayal, let alone with two women who would completely change my life. What started as heartbreak turned into a journey I never saw coming, one that redefined love, family, and forgiveness. Growing up, I often felt like a shadow in my own home. My parents were kind but distant, always consumed by their demanding work schedules. I turned to books for solace. They became my sanctuary, offering adventures and escapes from the persistent loneliness that seemed to follow me into every corner of my childhood. By the time I hit my teenage years, I found myself yearning for a deeper connection, someone who could fill the hollow spaces I carried inside. That all began to change when I met Anne-Marie Santos in middle school. She was like sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky, bringing warmth and brightness I hadn't realized I was missing. What started as a casual friendship grew into something more profound, a love that carried us through the chaos of high school, the challenges of college, and eventually, into marriage. From the moment I met her, I knew she was someone I wanted by my side for the rest of my life. Despite my parents' reservations about us being too young or too different, I couldn't imagine a future without her. Anne-Marie and I were as different as two people could be. She was the outgoing one, full of energy and charm, while I was quieter, more introspective. She thrived in athletic competitions, and I found my joy buried in books and academic pursuits. Yet, those differences never felt like obstacles. Instead, they gave us balance. We never forced our relationship, we simply grew into it, finding comfort in our shared dreams and unspoken fears. I wasn't sure if I believed in the idea of soulmates, but if they did exist, she was mine. When the time came for me to ask her father, Miguel Santos, for her hand in marriage, it wasn't an easy conversation. Miguel was a man of principle, someone who had built his life around loyalty, hard work, and family. He wanted to ensure my intentions were genuine, that my love for Anne-Marie was as unwavering as it seemed. I promised him that day that I would always put her happiness first, no matter the cost. For a while, I kept that promise, and our life together was as close to perfect as I could have hoped. But life doesn't always go the way you plan. Only 3 years into our marriage, things began to unravel. Anne-Marie changed, or maybe we both did. She started coming home late, her once radiant smile fading whenever she saw me. It was subtle at first, but over time, the distance between us became impossible to ignore. There's a unique kind of heartbreak in realizing that the person you love no longer feels the same way. One evening, as I sat at the dining table, I heard her footsteps approach. She entered the room quietly, her shoulders tense, her expression somber. I knew this conversation had been coming, and I had rehearsed my words 100 times. "Hi, Annie," I said gently. "Hey, Gavin," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not really." "Please, sit down. I need to explain something." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Annie, before you say anything, let me speak. I've thought about this a lot, and I need you to know it's not easy for me." Her eyes were wide, nervous, and brimming with unspoken emotions. I continued, "I love you, Annie. I always have, and I always will. But I've come to realize something. You're not happy anymore, and I don't want to be the reason you feel stuck. I want us to decide together what's best for both of us." She swallowed hard and nodded, her voice trembling. "Okay, Gavin. What's going on?" I looked into her eyes, searching for the connection we once had. "I think it's time we let each other go. I'll always love you, but I can't ignore how distant we've become. If you're honest with yourself, you'll see it too." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and for a brief moment, I felt a strange sense of relief. At least she wasn't pretending anymore. "Yes," she whispered. "You're right." The words stung, but they also reassured me that I was making the right choice. "I want a divorce," I said softly, the finality of it hanging in the air. Breaking the news to Miguel was a different kind of challenge. Sitting with him on his porch, beers in hand, I braced myself for his reaction. Miguel was a man I deeply respected. He had raised 8 children with his wife, Maria, in a small house in a tough neighborhood, and his loyalty to his family was unmatched. "Mijo," he said, his tone firm yet concerned. "Why are you here?" I hesitated, then spoke. "Sir, this is harder than I ever imagined. I've loved your daughter since the day I met her. I promised you I'd always put her first, and I believe that's what I'm doing now, even though it means stepping away." As I expected, he was furious. He switched between English and Spanish, his voice rising as he demanded an explanation. I let him vent, understanding that his anger came from a place of love and protection for his daughter. Even now, I'm not sure if he'll ever forgive me. But I hope, in time, he'll see that I made my decision out of love, not selfishness. I couldn't bring myself to share everything with Miguel. I loved his daughter, but some truths needed to remain between Anne-Marie and me. Admitting to him that our marriage had failed was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but deep down, I believed it was for the best. I owed him the respect of hearing it directly from me. Eventually, Miguel's anger settled just enough for me to explain myself. Though he was still upset and clearly embarrassed, he allowed me to leave without further confrontation. Walking away from that conversation felt like both a relief and a failure, a reminder that I wasn't just ending a relationship but unraveling years of trust and connection with people I deeply respected. When I spoke to Anne-Marie about the divorce, her reaction surprised me. She didn't cry, argue, or try to change my mind. In some ways, her calm acceptance made things easier, but a small part of me had hoped she'd fight for us, that she'd beg me to stay or show some emotion that hinted she still cared. Instead, her composed demeanor only confirmed what I already knew: our marriage was over. The only time she reacted was when I mentioned talking to her father. "I spoke to your dad today," I began carefully. "I explained what I'm about to tell you. I hope we can part ways quickly. I don't want financial ruin on top of everything else. I've prepared the paperwork for dividing our assets, especially the house. Please review them and let me know by next week." Anne-Marie nodded, her voice steady. "Okay, Gavin. I'll review them." Her calmness gnawed at me. It made me question myself: had I missed something all along? I could already hear the judgment from others: "Why didn't you confront her? Why not go after her or find out who was involved first?" But confrontation wasn't in my nature, and honestly, I didn't have the energy for revenge. The last fight I'd been in was in high school when someone made Anne-Marie cry. I had almost gotten expelled for it, but Miguel had stepped in to keep things quiet. That day taught me the cost of letting emotions take over. Now, at 25, my priority was my mental health. I was barely holding it together, losing sleep, and almost got fired because my focus was so scattered. I had no one to lean on. My mom passed away from breast cancer when I was in college, and my dad, who had turned to drinking after her death, moved to Florida and cut off all contact. I knew that if I was going to rebuild my life, I needed a fresh start. That meant Anne-Marie had to agree to the divorce. 2 weeks later, we sat across from each other at the attorney's office. The atmosphere was clinical, detached, as if we were business partners dissolving a venture instead of a married couple splitting a life. Anne-Marie agreed to give up the house, which we decided to sell. We divided our accounts: she kept the new car, and I held on to my old truck. It felt surreal. Everything we built together over years of love and hard work boiled down to numbers on a spreadsheet and signatures on a legal document. There was still the 90-day waiting period, but for all intents and purposes, it was done. "Where are you going to live, Gavin?" she asked as we finalized the details. "I rented a small apartment near the office," I replied, trying to sound matter-of-fact. "I'll stay there for now until I figure out my next steps." "Good," she said simply. "I guess I'll see you at the house closing." Absolutely, I replied, forcing a small smile. See you soon, Annie. But in truth, I wasn't staying. Something had been bothering me, a nagging suspicion I couldn't shake. A week later, as I packed the last of my things, I stumbled upon something that turned my world upside down, a positive pregnancy test. At first, I was confused, but as I checked Anne-Marie's birth control pills and noticed they were untouched, the reality hit me like a freight train. Another man had gotten my wife pregnant. The question of who consumed me, but the answer wasn't far behind. Anne-Marie had been distant for months, and now the pieces were falling into place. My mind raced back through every small, seemingly insignificant detail I had ignored, the subtle changes in her demeanor, the unexplained nights she came home late. I called her, intending to demand answers, but her number redirected to her office's front desk. They informed me she had already left for the day. Her car was still in the lot, so I drove to her workplace, convinced something was wrong. 30 minutes later, I got my answer. Her boss, Michael James, had always shown a polite interest in her, but I'd missed the signs. Instead of addressing my concerns, I'd buried myself in work, using it as an escape. Now, it was undeniable. The life I thought I had was gone, and I wasn't sure how to pick up the pieces. After our separation, I poured myself into rebuilding my life. For years, I had put my dreams on hold, but now it was time to chase them. I spent 4 years working tirelessly to earn my Juris Doctor and MBA, aiming for nothing less than a 4.0 GPA. Anne-Marie and I had once talked about going back to school together when we were more financially stable. Those plans had faded, but the desire remained. So, after everything fell apart, I took the LSAT, applied to law schools, and received an acceptance letter from a school in Las Vegas with a full scholarship. I didn't know much about the city or the school, only that it was far enough from home to give me the fresh start I desperately needed. Moving to a new place wasn't just about education, it was about reclaiming myself, finding out who I was without Anne-Marie. Once a month, I'd write letters to Mr. and Mrs. Santos, keeping them updated on my life. They were short but heartfelt, addressed formally to the couple I still respected deeply. Despite the pain, I promised myself I wouldn't stoop to bitterness or revenge, not against Anne-Marie, not against Michael James, her boss. It wasn't in me to spread rumors or hurt them deliberately. But that didn't mean I didn't feel the sting of their choices. It was a complex knot of emotions, pride for Anne-Marie as she pursued her dream of a big family, and heartbreak knowing that her happiness came at the cost of mine. Sometimes, when the ache was too much to bear, I'd allow myself small, petty thoughts, imagining a future where Michael James faced the fallout of his decisions. Those fleeting fantasies felt like cowardly acts, but they offered brief, hollow solace. I threw myself into personal growth during those years. At first, I didn't fully understand the advice of a mentor I met in law school, someone who subtly pushed me to reach beyond my comfort zone. But over time, his guidance paid off in ways I hadn't anticipated. I started going to the gym regularly, learning to cook, and becoming smarter about my finances. Eventually, I began investing in real estate, a step I never thought I'd take. If it weren't for his mentorship, I might have settled for a comfortable, middle-class existence. But with his encouragement, I built a life that was not just stable but thriving. Years later, I still kept in touch with the Santos family. One day, I made a gesture that I felt was overdue, a significant gift meant to honor everything they had given me indirectly. When Mrs. Santos called me in response, her voice was full of emotion. "Gavin, this is too much," she exclaimed. "Mrs. Santos," I replied warmly, "it's nothing compared to what you and Mr. Santos have done for me. You've always been family to me, and it's an honor to give back." "Oh, Gavin," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You've always been such a wonderful boy. Un momento, Miguel wants to talk to you." She handed the phone to her husband, and I could immediately hear the hesitation in his voice. "Gavin," he began, his tone serious. Yes, sir, I answered, bracing myself. This is too much, he said firmly. I can't let you go to such lengths. The cost must have been enormous. I can't imagine it. Senor, I interrupted gently, this isn't about cost. It's about gratitude. Please, accept this as a small token of my appreciation for all you've done for me over the years. He fell silent for a moment before quietly thanking me. A few weeks later, I received another call from Mrs. Santos. Gavin O'Connor, she greeted cheerfully. Yes, Mrs. Santos, I answered, smiling at her familiar warmth. When are you coming to see us, mijo? She asked eagerly. Hello, Mrs. Santos. How was the flight? I replied, buying myself a moment to think. Good, good, she said. Miguel and I need to rest for a bit, but after that, we're ready to see you. Will you be here soon? I quickly rearranged my day. I can be there in about an hour, I assured her. Great, mijo. See you then, she said, her tone bright before hanging up. Their calls and visits reminded me of the life I had left behind, the bonds I had formed that no divorce or distance could sever. They also reminded me of how far I had come, not just as a professional but as a person. The Santos family had always been a source of warmth and pride in my life, and hearing Mrs. Santos say, "We're so proud of you, mijo," meant the world to me. That week was unlike anything I'd experienced in years. The influence of Rothschild, my mentor and business ally, seemed to follow us everywhere we went. I had chosen the limo, the resort, the restaurants, and the shows based on my professional connections. But Rothschild's reach elevated everything. We were treated like VIPs wherever we went, greeted by owners and directors who seemed eager to share stories of how I'd helped them in the past. They offered us the best seats, the finest wine, and impeccable service. It was humbling to see how far I'd come and how my efforts had rippled out to affect so many others. Even Mr. Santos, usually reserved, admitted, "I have to say, Gavin, this week has been more eventful than I expected." The trip revitalized me in ways I didn't realize I needed. When I returned to work, I shared an idea with Rothschild. He smiled knowingly, gave me his approval, and let me run with it. The project wasn't designed to generate long-term profits, but it felt like the most meaningful work I'd ever undertaken. In just 6 weeks, I finalized nearly all the title deeds, secured a buyer with full financing, and made a few strategic phone calls. With everything in place, I booked a flight back to my hometown for the first time in nearly a decade. Arriving at the airport felt surreal. I picked up my rental car, loaded my luggage, and started driving through streets that held so many memories. The city had barely changed, yet it no longer felt like home. Passing through the Santos family's neighborhood, I noticed how much the area had declined. Most houses were in visible disrepair, except for theirs. Their home stood as a beacon, well-maintained amidst the surrounding neglect. It was a reminder of their resilience and pride, no matter the circumstances. My destination was a new condominium complex built above retail spaces. It had a modern, almost futuristic design that was unlike anything else in the area. Restaurants, stores, a theater, and even a grocery store filled the lower levels, while the upper floors housed sleek, stylish apartments. When I arrived at the apartment I had arranged, I could see the care and detail that went into its construction. It was brand new, with 2 spacious bedrooms, a modern kitchen, and breathtaking views of the city. It wasn't just a place to stay, it was a statement. When the Santos family arrived, Mrs. Santos looked around, wide-eyed. "Mijo, I didn't know this was a hotel. These rooms must be expensive." I chuckled. "Yeah, we'll need to talk about that," I replied, knowing they'd soon realize the full scope of what I had planned. As I opened the door, their amazement only grew. Every detail of the space was designed with them in mind. I had spoken to their 7 children, asking them to describe their parents' dream home. From the colors on the walls to the layout of the furniture, I had made sure it reflected everything they loved. Their attention shifted to the champagne sitting on the counter. "Are we celebrating?" Mr. Santos asked, his brows raised. "Yes," I said, popping the cork. "I hope so. What's the occasion?" I raised my glass, gesturing around the room. "Your retirement, and your new home." The room fell silent. "Oh my," Mrs. Santos whispered, her hands trembling as she brought them to her face. I explained everything. The apartment was theirs, and so was a small trust fund that would ensure they never had to worry about money again. They wouldn't become rich, but they would have a comfortable life without the burden of work. It was a silver parachute, a way to honor them for all they'd given me. "Gavin, how did you manage this so quickly?" Mr. Santos asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Buying the property next to yours took some effort," I admitted, "but Rothschild found a buyer through his connections. There's a new casino being built across the river in Iowa, and we negotiated the price based on that. The zoning changes were handled with help from our city council contacts. The rest, well, it's just a solid investment." Tears streamed down Mrs. Santos's face as she whispered, "This is too much, mijo." "It's exactly what you deserve," I said softly, my voice breaking. The next day, while running errands, I unexpectedly ran into Anne-Marie. "Gavin," she said, her tone a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Why are you here?" "I'm just shopping," I replied, keeping the conversation light. "And you?" "Oh, I work here now," she explained. Then, with a tilt of her head, she added, "I meant, why are you in town?" "Just finishing up some business and visiting old friends," I said casually, though the encounter stirred emotions I thought I'd buried. When Anne-Marie asked, "Was I on your list of friends to visit?" her tone was light, almost joking, but I could hear the faint trace of hope beneath it. "Honestly, no," I admitted, not wanting to give her false reassurance. "Oh," she said, her smile faltering as disappointment crept into her voice. "Okay. Well, nice to see you, Gavin." "You too, Anne-Marie," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Later that evening, I found myself sitting in a quiet corner booth of a cafe when she walked in. I hadn't planned on it, but I offered to buy her a drink. She accepted, and when she slid into the booth across from me, I stayed seated, not wanting to make the moment feel too formal. For a few moments, she was quiet, fiddling with her drink before finally speaking. "You lied to me," she said, her voice carrying a hint of accusation. "And you lied to me first," I retorted. We both knew exactly what the other meant. She looked down, momentarily embarrassed, before continuing. "I didn't think you'd actually leave town. I hoped we'd have a chance to talk." "What would have been the point?" I asked, genuinely puzzled by her admission. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. "I don't know. Maybe to fix things. I made a huge mistake, and I'm sorry, okay?" Her voice wavered, and I could see the emotion rising in her. I groaned inwardly. The years apart had given me clarity, a chance to move forward, but it seemed they had left Anne-Marie clinging to illusions. "Nonsense," I said firmly, refusing to let her rewrite the past. Her eyes watered, but I pressed on. "Just because things didn't turn out the way you hoped doesn't mean you can rewrite history. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you care now." "I did care," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I leaned back in my seat, unconvinced. "Really? Did you care when you made those choices? When you hurt me?" She exhaled shakily. "His wife found out," she said, her words heavy with shame. "And so did his boss. His wife divorced him, and he had to resign. He left me, and I ended up having to quit my job too. It was all too embarrassing. And I'm supposed to feel bad for you?" I asked, my tone icy. "I don't know, Gavin," she said, her voice breaking as tears welled in her eyes. "I made a mistake. I got involved in something bad and couldn't stop. I know I was wrong. Can't you forgive me?" I love you. I. I died the day you left and have missed you every moment since. I wanted you to come back, to give me another chance. I stared at her, unmoved by the confession. And Marie, the woman you're describing is not the same one I loved. So, let me ask you this, how many men have there been while you've been pining for me? Her face crumbled at the question, but I didn't let up. Since I left, I've gone to law school, passed the bar, started a new career, and built a new life. But in all that time, I haven't been with another woman, not since our last time together. I moved forward. Can you honestly say the same? She blinked back tears, unable to respond. Here's the truth, and Marie, I continued, my voice softening slightly but remaining firm. You wanted someone else, and I loved you enough to let you go without a harsh word. But I've grown since then, and I won't let myself be pulled back into the past. I've built a life I'm proud of, and I won't jeopardize that for someone who couldn't see what she had until it was gone. She looked at me for a long moment before nodding, as if realizing she'd never hear the words she wanted. As I gathered my things to leave, I couldn't help but reflect on the years that had passed. The heartbreak, the growth, the lessons learned, it all brought me to this moment. Later, at the airport, I ran into Amy, a kind brunette with curly hair, and her cousin Lydia, a shy blonde. They were standing together, waiting for my flight to be announced. Amy approached me, her smile warm but a little nervous. "Mr. O'Connor," she said formally before catching herself. "I mean, Gavin. We just wanted to thank you, but we didn't know how." "No thanks are necessary," I said with a reassuring smile. "I'm just glad everything worked out for you both." Amy smiled, while Lydia remained quiet but gave a small nod of gratitude. As the announcement for my flight came over the speakers, I began to gather my things. "It was nice to see you both again," I said, ready to leave. "Take care, Gavin," Amy said softly as I walked away. With every step forward, I felt lighter. My past no longer held me, and the future felt wide open. Just as I was about to step away, Amy's words stopped me. "Gavin, I know you've been through a lot, and I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for me and Lydia. But I also think it's important to say something." Her tone shifted, hesitant but firm. "And Marie was part of this family too. She shared in the joy and pain just like the rest of us. I know she hurt you, and you made difficult choices because of what happened, but she didn't betray the rest of us. A few months ago, you told me you spoke to her for the first time in years. I can only imagine how hard that was, but when you told me what she said about all of us, it stayed with me. So, with all due respect, Gavin, I think we need to let the past go. For everyone's sake." Her words stayed with me long after she and Lydia left. A few days later, as I sorted my laundry and emptied my pockets, I found the napkin with Amy's phone number still sitting on my dining table, looking like an unintentional centerpiece. It had been 3 days since we'd exchanged numbers, and I couldn't stop thinking about her kindness and her sharp insight. Finally, I decided to call. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Hello?" Amy's familiar voice answered. Yes, can I, speak to Amy, please?" I stammered, suddenly feeling nervous. "This is her," she replied, her tone curious. "Oh, hi, Amy. It's Gavin O'Connor. We met at the airport, and, you gave me your number," I said, trying not to sound as awkward as I felt. "Oh, Gavin. Hi." Her voice lit up. "I wasn't sure you'd actually call." Over the next few weeks, our connection grew. I invited Amy and Lydia to my place one evening for dinner. My apartment, a 3-bedroom penthouse with a stunning view of the Las Vegas Strip, was part of a project Rothschild and I had worked on. I had jumped at the chance to buy it, though I didn't mention to them that I also owned the building. "You're actually my first visitors here," I admitted as I chopped vegetables. "Really? No girlfriend?" Amy asked, sounding surprised. Nope, I said casually, focusing on the meal. I haven't even been on a date since my divorce 10 years ago. Amy and Lydia sat at the kitchen island, sipping wine as we chatted. The conversation flowed effortlessly, but every so often, I noticed Amy watching me intently, a soft smile playing on her lips. Lydia, quieter by nature, chimed in occasionally, her shyness giving way to a warm, genuine laugh. By the end of the evening, as the last of the wine disappeared and the city lights twinkled in the distance, both women gave me brief hugs and kisses on the cheek. We should do this again soon, Amy said, her eyes sparkling. Absolutely, I replied with a grin. I'm free for the rest of the week, actually. To my surprise, they took me up on it. The very next day, they showed up with a picnic basket, insisting we have lunch on the rooftop terrace. It was a casual, easy afternoon, filled with laughter and stories about their childhoods. Amy shared that Lydia had been through a tough time recently and was slowly opening up again. Their warmth and kindness were infectious, and I found myself looking forward to their visits. For months into our friendship, however, I noticed a shift. During a quiet Friday night dinner at my place, the atmosphere felt different. Both Amy and Lydia seemed unusually reserved, their usual lightheartedness replaced with a tension I couldn't ignore. As dinner wrapped up, I decided to address it directly. Girls, is something wrong? Lydia hesitated, glancing at Amy. No. Not really, she said softly. Amy took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. There's something I want to ask you, but we're not sure how to phrase it. Amy, I said gently, you can ask me anything. She looked at me, her expression a mix of nervousness and determination, and I braced myself for what was coming next. I have no filter with you too, I said, leaning back against the couch. Just ask. I promise not to be offended, no matter what my answer is. Amy took a deep breath, glancing briefly at Lydia for reassurance. Why haven't you ever married again? She asked softly, her words tinged with curiosity but also care. I paused, caught slightly off guard by the question. Before I could answer, Amy continued. Actually, before we get into that, Lydia wanted you to read some of her work tonight. We think it'll help you understand what we're looking for. What you're looking for? I asked, puzzled. Yes, Amy said with a reassuring smile. Read her stories tonight, and then tomorrow, we'll talk about what this all means for us. Can you do that? I nodded slowly, still unsure what they were leading up to. You just want me to read her stories? Yes, Gavin, Amy confirmed. And then we'll talk. I agreed, though part of me couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into uncharted emotional territory. All right, I said. Later that evening, I sat alone with Lydia's work. The stories were beautifully written, filled with vivid imagery and well-drawn characters that seemed to leap off the pages. Through her writing, I felt like I got to know Lydia on a deeper level, her fears, her hopes, her struggles. It was moving, and it left me with a sense of admiration for her creative mind. The next day, the girls arrived around noon. After we settled in with drinks and snacks, Amy wasted no time. Gavin, she began, her tone serious but kind. Lydia and I aren't involved with each other sexually. I blinked, momentarily thrown. Okay, that's important to know, but honestly, I hadn't thought about it, I said truthfully. Lydia smiled shyly as Amy continued, we've always looked out for each other. We're family in every sense, except biologically. Lydia's been through a lot, and I've tried to be there for her, but we've reached a point where we realized something was missing. Amy paused, studying my reaction. Her selflessness was evident in every word, and I couldn't help but be moved by the strength of their bond. It was one of the kindest and most beautiful things I've ever heard, I said softly. Amy smiled, but her next words carried a weight I hadn't expected. We realized we needed someone else, Gavin. Someone special. The guys I liked were too weak for Lydia, and the ones she liked were too arrogant for me. We needed someone kind, confident, and understanding. And then, we met you. Lydia, who had been quiet the entire time, finally spoke. You helped us without asking for anything in return. You're the kind of person we've been waiting for. My heart raced as Amy added, we want you to be part of our lives, Gavin. In every way. Over the next few months, our bond deepened. Amy and I began dating, and Lydia grew closer to me as well, though her connection remained unique. She saw me as a protector, a guide, and eventually, something more. One evening, Amy confided in me, her eyes steady as she spoke. When we make love for the first time, it won't just be about passion. It'll be about creating life. Sharing a piece of ourselves for a common purpose. A child? I asked, realizing where the conversation was headed. Amy nodded. Yes, Gavin. You'll be giving Lydia and me something we can't achieve on our own, a family. It was a lot to process, but I could see the sincerity in her eyes. Lydia, sitting beside her, smiled through her tears. I think you've been waiting for me to realize this, she said, her voice trembling. And you've waited long enough. A year later, we welcomed our first child, Olivia. From the moment she was born, Lydia and Olivia shared a bond that was instant and unbreakable. While Amy and I were Olivia's parents in every traditional sense, Lydia was like her compass, her heart. Were we jealous of how close they were? I asked myself sometimes. But the answer was always no. Amy and I lived as husband and wife, while Lydia remained an integral part of our family. The balance we created was unconventional but perfect in its own way. My journey to happiness had taken twists and turns I never could have predicted. But here, surrounded by Amy, Lydia, and our children, I had finally found my place again.